Hello and welcome to Scripture Untangled, a podcast by the Canadian Bible Society. My name is Joanna Lafleur. I'm a friend of the Canadian Bible Society, and I'm going to be your guide for today's episode. Today, we're going to step into a retirement chapter of life with Dave and Diane Toycen. The Toycens are a well-known couple in many Canadian circles, in part because of where their careers took them. Dave Toycen served with World Vision for 42 years and was president of World Vision Canada for 19 years, a season which saw World Vision's dramatic growth in efforts to serve the world's poor. In 2018, Dave received one of the highest honors Canada can bestow, the Order of Canada, for Dave Toycen's lifelong commitment to serving community and nation. Diane Toycen has served as a community builder as well, best known for her career as Director of Programming and Parish Life at Trinity Church, Streetsville in Mississauga. Diane led a dynamic season of the growth of that church, helping establish Streetsville Church as a nationwide beacon for how to renew and create witness and spiritual care in the Anglican Church. There are many interesting lessons on global and community care we could learn from Dave and Diane Toycen, but our interview today is going to take us on a journey of grief. A grief the Toycens encountered when their daughter and daughter-in-law died from cancer. Lorna Dueck, a longtime friend of the Toycens, is our host for this intimate interview on how two parents cope with grief and great loss. Here's Lorna Dueck with Dave and Diane Toycen.
Every family has a story. Dave and Diane Toycen are inviting us into theirs today. And that part of the family story that means saying goodbye when death arrives. The Toycens said the final goodbye to their only daughter, Jocelyn, in 2022, and to their daughter-in-law, Linda, in 2015. Both women were wives and young mothers who died in their homes. Both had family around them, and both young women of the Toycen family died at the end of a battle with cancer. Dave and Diane, what an introduction. I'm so sorry we have to give that. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Scripture Untangled loves to listen to where God is in the stories, and this is a difficult one for us. You've both been so engaged with sharing your lives with the world. How do you feel now about sharing your story of grief publicly with the world? And Diane, let me start with you.
Oh my. Well, I think given the time that has gone by now, that's really helped a lot. And some of the things that I did to remember Jocelyn, in sharing those with other people have helped me kind of feel more comfortable with it and being able to talk about it with other people.
And Dave, you've done so many media interviews. I've interviewed you back in the day when you were on the field. How does it feel to be here on this topic for you?
Yeah, it's certainly different. And yet I would be quick to say the loss of human life anywhere, it's a heartbreak at some level. And so, but obviously when it's your children, it's just so close to your heart. And it's difficult, it's challenging. I think for me, one of the words that I've kind of given up is closure. You don't get closure for this.
Wow.
And my own experience and from, advice, that isn't the right goal you're after, is to somehow get rid of it or release it, but just say it's part of your life for the rest of your life. Yeah. And of course it changes as time passes, but that essential missing thing in your life is always there.
Diane, I see you
it's
nodding.
It's the hardest loss we've had to deal with.
Of course.
And it just keeps coming back as we remember that she's no longer with us.
Yeah. And that's 2022, 2015. It's just keeps coming back.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's start on your story. So let's start going chronologically with your first great family loss. Your son, James, brings you the devastating news that his wife, your daughter-in-law, Linda, mom of your 2 granddaughters, is facing a cancer diagnosis of multiple myeloma. Diane, what emotions begin to happen for you?
Well, we certainly worry about what's going to happen and how will our son manage raising 2 daughters. Our oldest granddaughter was 15 and 10, and youngest 10. Yeah.
And you right away went to, did you go to the worst right away? Like, is that what you were thinking?
It's been so long. I can't remember exactly the feelings at the beginning. They live in Seattle, Washington, so they were far away from us. We'd hear from our son on the phone, talking and giving updates on what was happening. She was in treatment, and then it was around the time Dave was getting ready to retire from World Vision, and he had his retirement party the end of March 27th was his retirement, and our son came out for that. But while he was with us, she was in the hospital, and then when he went back home, things continued to get worse, and they decided that she was not going to recover, and she wanted to come home and be at home the last days. And so she had the month of May, I think, that she was at home, and set up a hospital bed in the family room, and she was pretty alert at the beginning, and lots of friends came, and friends from the hospital and from her work, and friends from her church, and just around her bed, and she was just a part of life going on around the family there. I went out several times and stayed and helped out, and her mother lived right nearby, and her sister. And so that was sort of a progression through May, and then the end, she just deteriorated more and more, and we just watched this happen.
And as the very tender hours are ending for Linda's life, Dave, you take your granddaughters outside and tell me what you did.
Well, we were part of a cancer fundraising for the weekend, and the girls were there. They were doing some games. What's so interesting about this is that, in my experience, that God shows up in ways that you don't expect. And so as that was going on, Linda's dying, but all these people were gathered together to raise money for the Cancer Society. But at the same time, James was there as well. He came down and spoke. I couldn't believe that he could do that.
Had she passed already?
And she had passed, and he came down and spoke.
Wow.
And had some tears, but he, expressed their gratitude for this. And it was really quite an amazing experience. And so I mention this also because that's one of the things that helps us. I think helps. You don't have to be a Christian, but certainly Christians really experience this, where things happen, and we say they're God moments in the middle of these crises that reminds you again, God's present, and the death is not the only reality.
And so
the other thing was that this was at night. They were walking around the track at a local school, and there were candlelight around with for each of the people that were being prayed for. So people walk around the track very quietly, praying for their loved one, and friends from their church came and joined us. our oldest granddaughter, had organized a team. They had a big banner, Team Linda, they were carrying around the track. And it was at night, and then after she passed, James came down, and we told the family that were there at the track. And then that program that night, we're sitting in the bleachers, and people were being interviewed and talked, and James was when he spoke, and it was amazing. His wife had just died.
And he could speak to a cancer rally. And I can't help, because, I've had a long history with your marketing, how we did the pictures for World Vision. We knew it was all about story. You have to have story.
Right.
And here you have the gift of Linda's life passing that very night when people need to see the urgency of cancer. And you gave her story to the campaign. Like only your family, like you say, God handpicks items to say, this is a match for this person in grief.
Yeah.
My goodness. Diane, 2 young girls without a mom, your granddaughters. What happens? How do you feel?
Well, living so far away, it was really difficult to be engaged in all that was going on. And our son just was an amazing job. I mean, he'd always been able to cook and clean and do all kinds of stuff. He was involved in the family activities, and he took a leave from his job. And so he was able to look after them. And Linda's mother and sister lived nearby, and they had a good support system at their church. And so they were able to carry on, and somehow he was able to do all that. We went out periodically, we could, and celebrated things with them, and were able to be a part of their lives that way.
I just want to comment, the latest thing that's happened is James, about 2 or 3 months ago, preached at the church he goes to and told the story of his experience of losing his wife, and shared his experiences.
And his sister.
Yeah.
And that's profound to see James be able to be healed to that.
Amazing.
Why are you so amazed?
Oh, first of all, he's a more quiet person. He's very articulate, and I'm just amazed at how he's become this experience, as awful as it was, as difficult as it was. I think he's a stronger person and even more sensitive and caring after going through this experience.
Okay, so 5 years later, the cancer word re-enters your family. Diane, how did you find out that your only daughter, Jocelyn, had cancer?
I think in February 2021, she was having some symptoms, and she went and had a colonoscopy. And after her meeting with the doctor to get the results, she and her husband came over to our house and told us the results of the test, that she had a colorectal cancer. And so they were going to start treatment on that. And it was a shock. I think when we first knew that there might be a problem, when she went in for the testing, I know I was praying for help to just be able to accept whatever came our way, and that we would be able to get through this.
Dave, what do you remember of hearing that diagnosis?
I think shock. I really felt that. It was just because she's been so healthy, and it was just total surprise for me, and so it was very difficult. But she was, right from the beginning, she was positive, and she always has had a very bright personality, and And she just was, I mean, it was serious, and there was certainly fear there, but she already had a lot of courage and was, put the best on it that she could.
So a few days later, after she went home, she sent us an email and said, "Do you remember the picture that you gave me? It sits in my bedroom. You gave it to me as a graduation gift. Your words on the card resonate with me more than ever. Why not me?" And so what we had done, this 27 years before, when she graduated from high school, we'd given her a woodcut of a girl named Jocelyn Hutton, who had developed cancer and on her leg and had it amputated, and she was so bright and so outgoing. And the quote in the information that was given with the woodcut was, she said, "I've prayed to God for guidance and help, and I finally realized that God gave me my life to live, and I'm going to live every day that I have left. And I'm not going to sit around and sulk and say, why me? Instead, I've decided to be different and say, why not me?" And Jocelyn was thinking of that when she was dealing with this diagnosis.
And so it blessed you that God had again lined up the details, this little woodcut and that prayer.
Yeah, and the letter that I had given her with the woodcut was this: "Dearest Jocelyn, this woodcut of Jocelyn Hutton by Nancy Jackson is your first piece of art. It was chosen for you to be a constant reminder that when trouble or illness comes your way, as it surely does to everyone, you will ask God for help and trust Him rather than blame Him. Instead of saying, why me, you will say, why not me, like Jocelyn Hutton. You will remember that we will always love you, and you can trust God's love for you too. With all our love, Mom and Dad." And then this is one of my favorite quotes from Charles Spurgeon: "God is too wise to be mistaken. God is too good to be unkind. When you don't understand, when you don't see His plan, when you can't trace His hand, trust His heart."
Wow.
That was 27 years before it actually happened. It was amazing.
And
Slightly bizarre in some ways, We had no idea that this was going to happen to her, but we just thought it was such a powerful thought for her to, and story to hear about.
And then 27 years later, when she's facing cancer, she takes down your piece of art on
right.
Jocelyn Hutton and your letter and knows exactly we're going to do this. And you guys, sorry to keep coming back to the marketing theme, but you make T-shirts. You make a
so when
you're all in for the fight. Of course you are. And she's not so far away, right? They lived in same city
they
as
live
you
in
did.
Oakville.
Yeah.
They live about 20 minutes away from us.
Yeah. So why make the T-shirts?
Oh, well, I started thinking, what can we do to help support her through? I know she's going to end up taking chemotherapy and going to the hospital and everything. I got this idea that I would make some T-shirts that she could wear, and the T-shirt design was saying, "I'm in God's hands," and it was some praying hands. And so she wore that and several of the other ones off and on. And actually, I think she was wearing this in the last few days of her life.
Wow. And these things in the sad process of saying goodbye, they become markers. They mean so much. Dave, tell us about realizing you guys are not going to be able to fix this. She's not going to win.
Well, that was very hard. There's no question about that. It was very difficult. But once again, she was just so positive that God was present in the midst of all of this. And the other reality, of course, is we were really concerned about her boys, her sons that were young, But at the same time, she was positive and continued to, do her best to be a mother. And her husband was also very, very supportive. But it was very hard. I have to say that it was very difficult because nothing just really worked. In spite of, I think, good medical care, this kind of cancer involving the liver eventually, that's really what killed her, and not being able to stop that. And so it was very challenging, but she, right up until the end, was, very strong in her faith, and she still kept saying, "Why not me? Don't." She never took those words back, ever.
I'm taking a minute out of this conversation with the Toycens to tell you about the Bible course. Because whether you're a seasoned Bible reader or you're just starting on your journey, the Bible course offers a superb overview of the world's best-selling book. This 8-session course will help you grow in your understanding of the Bible. Using a unique storyline, the Bible course shows you how key events, books, and characters all fit together. It's great for in-person groups or digital gatherings. It can be used anywhere. You can watch the first session for free and review the accompanying course guide. Go to biblecourse.ca to learn more. biblecourse.ca. And as always, the link is down in the show notes.
Diane, did you have those words? Why not me? Those are difficult words for a mother to embrace.
I suppose. I don't recall thinking that. I just know what a comfort it was to her, and we were so proud of how she was reacting and dealing with it, and so positive that it encouraged us. And I think we were positive, thinking she had the surgery for the colorectal cancer. They said there was no spread. That seemed like that was going to be the end of it, and she would start chemotherapy, and then they discovered some spots on her liver. And when we thought that everything was going to come to a celebration in May of 2022, the ring the bell thing after chemo and everything, then they discovered the spots on our liver and had to start other kinds of treatment, and it just kept coming. But she was always so encouraging and positive and involved in people's lives and things. She eventually had to quit working, but she
And
had
what's
time off.
happening with your walk with God as you're watching your daughter be positive, but the diagnosis is continuing?
I just keep trusting that she's in God's hands and she's going to get through this. We'll get through it.
So it appears imminent that a prayer vigil is needed for Jocelyn. Tell us about that prayer vigil.
We had previously planned a prayer vigil at the church on the Sunday, the 10th, because she had some important doctor's appointments on the Monday to deal with the liver and some other follow-up things that we were just hoping that would resolve some issues. And so we had a prayer vigil, 7:00, and we had people sign up that they would pray for her for 24 hours.
I remember that.
And we had about 100 people come to the prayer vigil at the church. So there was a service there, and various people from our congregation prayed prayers for her and for her husband and for the boys and for us. And it was just a wonderful, we lit candles, and it was just a wonderful time. And then after it was over, our pastor and his wife went with us, and we went to the house. And her husband's family, parents and sister and her boys, we all were around her bed, and we had communion and anointing of oil. and prayers, and then we left. And that night she passed away about early in the morning on the 11th. And my son-in-law knew something was happened, was going to happen, and got the boys up, and our oldest grandson said, "Oh, now she's with Jesus." And that was it. And the prayers were going on the whole time, and I think it was a comfort for everyone to feel they were a part of helping her.
And I remember at the funeral, the pastor giving a baseball illustration to that great crowd, many who were not churched and many who were. But for all, he gave the illustration of the pitcher's throw. The pitcher has to release, and then there is the great catch. And he helped me picture Jocelyn being caught by God. Dave, was that a soothing image for you?
No, very much so. It was very creative and very relevant. And it was, when you're in this sort of situation, you're kind of looking for, is there some light somewhere? And that was a shining light in the middle of, tremendous grief. And it was brilliant, really brilliant.
So, Dave, your career has grief on its map. I just kind of looked at your resume. In 42 years with World Vision, you faced death in its tracks. Mass scale, 1984 in Ethiopia, 400,000 die. Indian Ocean, 2004, 250,000 die. Yeah. Were there dynamics from your familiarity with loss and seeing death that were helpful in your losing Jocelyn?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I've struggled in these massive disasters, whether it's civil war, whether it's natural disasters, to somehow find a balance between surviving so that aren't part of the problem, but you're taking the death and all the things that are going on, take it seriously, but not be overwhelmed by it. And that was very hard sometimes especially with children, and just some of the terrible things that were being done to people, children. And so that's kind of one stream of my life. But I'd be very quick to say, as much as I've tried to be empathetic and caring with the children that we worked with for years and years in World Vision in all different places, it's still different when it's your daughter that's dying from cancer. And so I struggled with that, I think, as much as anyone. And yet I think I can honestly say, in spite of the early loss of our daughter's life, somehow God was present there. And it was always amazing to me, something would come up that would remind me of that and somehow get me over. And when she was dying, we had a gathering together. Diane's mentioned it, and one of the things that was helpful to us is this. There's an Anglican practice. It's called Compline, and it's readings from the old Anglican prayer book, and it talks about in very simple language. To just remind us of who we are, who God is, and how we're all connected together in this, and that we're not alone. And was really helpful. And I used it I read some of it for the family, and it's just a great reminder that God is present. And this is a tradition that you do normally at the end of the day. to recognize the day is coming, and the idea that night to a certain is kind of a sign of death. And so it's just an interesting discipline. That was something very helpful to us. And it's something that still stays with me. And the other thing I would say is that I think, as Christians, we look to Jesus when we're in these kind of situations, particularly. And I've really been, I think it's really challenged me to be aware of that. And I think one of my favorite passages in Scripture is the story of Jesus and his good friend Lazarus, who dies. And I think it's one of the best stories in the Bible about people, about death, and how God cares. And in this case, the he's died. Jesus shows up. Everybody's kind of giving him a hard time. Why weren't you here sooner? His sisters were giving him trouble. And Jesus, as many will know this story, Jesus, he cries out to a certain extent. He's overwhelmed by emotion about this, because this was a man that was special to him. And it's his great miracle, and brings him back to life. And he almost does it with anger, that this is not the way the world's supposed to be. And I've found, I think, new meaning from just reading that story so many times, and seeing that in the end, death doesn't win. That's obviously, it's a statement of faith. There's a lot of scientists that would say they can't prove that. But I think for those of us who have walked this trail of spirituality and having experiences of various kinds, there's good evidence that we're not making it up, that something's really happening that's going to shape our lives and give us the energy and the faith to walk through these hard situations and see the light rather than just the darkness.
Diane, did God accompany you with light as you were in the grief journey?
Oh, I'm sure of that. Yeah.
You felt his presence.
Oh, yes.
And how did you practice it? How did you, what was your routine with it? Did you read your Bible? Did you read the prayer book?
I've been a part of a community Bible study, CBS, for, 25 years or so, as a participant and then as a leader. And so Bible study has always been a part of my life, and doing that, and just the knowledge that of God's promise to be with us, to comfort us, and just put my faith in God that was going to get us through this.
God has not disappointed.
No, and there were amazing things that happened that were a reassurance of God's presence with us. And one story I have to tell.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Like, I don't know, it must have been about 2 weeks after the funeral. And we're at home, and the doorbell rings, and I go to the door, and there is Jocelyn's 6th grade teacher at the door. Now, I know her through church and an organization, the Open Door, that we volunteered at, but I hadn't seen her for about 10 years. But she always remembered Jocelyn because we had just moved from Australia, and Jocelyn had a strong accent, and in her 6th grade class, the kids just loved to hear her talk, and she was just such a bright light. And also this teacher, she had a daughter, and they had some connection at some point. But anyway, Donna shows up at the door with a planter of hands like this, two sets of hands together, like 4 hands with a planter in the middle of it. And I couldn't believe, because it reminded me so much of the T-shirt of
I'm in God's
I'm
hands.
in your hands, God's hands. And this planter was an incredible message to me from God that I'm with you.
Yes.
What happened with this planter? I set it out on the deck of our house, and I could see it every day, and it was such a comfort, a reminder of it, and went through winter and snow, and then all of a sudden one morning I went out and the pot had cracked open with the hands all like that. And I was just so upset. I thought, I've got to get that replaced. And so I emailed my friend Donna and said, where did you get it? I'd really like to get another one. And she says, I'll get another one for you. I couldn't believe this. And so about a month later, she comes with a new pot. And then she said, what do you do with the old one? I said, I don't know what to do with it. She said, well, my son's a dentist and he works with amalgam and maybe he can glue it together again. So she took the broken pieces away, and another month or so later, she comes back and she brings the old one back to me, all glued together. And that same day, we had been looking after the boys, and their dad came to pick them up. And when he came, I said, I got to tell you a story. So he came in, and I explained about the pot and everything. I said, I've got 2 of them now. I don't need 2 of them. Do you want one of them? He said, oh, sure. I said, which one do you want? He said, well, I'll take the broken one. That's got a great story to it. So he has that on his patio deck at home. And so I have the new one with a new plant in it, and I brought it in this winter because I didn't want to risk it breaking again. Yeah. But that was just one of the things that happened that was just so encouraging.
Acts of kindness really matter on the grief journey, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the other thing too, we must say, I want to, is we have been so impressed with our son-in-law, how engaged and careful and thoughtful and loving of his sons, and caring, with Jocelyn with love and care through all of this. And that was another blessing, because that was part of how we all survived together.
There are people listening who have not yet done the journey of grief. Any advice, Dave, for how they should?
Well, I think we've said so much that might be, but I'll talk about a book just briefly. It's called Prayer in the Night, and it's written by a woman priest, Anglican, and telling the story of, to a certain extent, of her life, tremendous challenges, but at the same time, she's a person of deep faith and talks you through how we get through these hard nights. And it's the subtitle is For Those Who Work or Watch or Weep. And it's a really interesting book.
All right. It has been a long journey. And Diane, you've got another thing you want to show us. You've got so many memories.
One of the things that was so helpful for me in just kind of bringing some kind of closure was to create a book of memories for my grandsons. And I made 2 copies of this and wrote a letter in it. This is my book of memories. And it really kind of chronicles the time when she was diagnosed, and has copies of all the emails that she sent us, that we sent out to family, friends, prayer team at our church, just with updates about what was happening. It chronicles that. There's photos of her during that time with the boys and with us. And then I have picture collage of all the pictures I put together for the visitation and the funeral, with the different stages in her life. I want all these things. I wanted my grandsons to know about her because they're going to forget. They were 12 and 10. I'm 12 and 8 when she passed. And they won't remember all these things. And so I have all the prayers that were said at the prayer vigil. I have all the eulogies that were said by Dave's sister and her son, Jonathan's closest cousin, and her best friend, Jen, and her brother-in-law.
I think
all these are there.
I think what I'm hearing from your family is let grief be expansive. Don't just try and think it can be packaged up neatly.
Yeah.
It's all memories, clippings, do whatever it takes,
Yes.
friends, everything. It takes up a lot of space, doesn't it, Dave?
Oh, yeah,
But
it does.
especially with children who are going to, like
Yeah,
our granddaughters, they're 24 and 18 now, and the youngest one doesn't remember a whole lot about her mother. They're dealing with these things, and I wanted to have something for my grandsons that they could look back on when they get older and they are dealing with questions and whatever, that they can find out who their mother was and how she impacted so many people and how much she was loved.
Well, just true to the Toycen nature, you have been very generous with sharing the big, big story of losing two, daughter and daughter-in-law, in your family, and challenging us to reach deep, share widely, let God surprise you, and don't rush. It's never going away.
No.
And the other good news, this last summer, our son James remarried. And we had a wonderful celebration. He married a lovely woman, an elementary school principal, with two daughters that were ages between our two granddaughters. So she knows how to deal with girls. And they've just been a wonderful, happy celebration to have that.
Dave and Diane Toycen, you've taken us into very personal territory. And there's a lot of families that either are grieving or are preparing for grief. Thank you for taking us on your journey at Scripture Untangled.
Thank you.